Perhaps you were expecting some surprise, for me to reveal a secret that had eluded you, something that would change your perspective of events, shatter you to your core. There is no great revelation, no great secret. There is only you.
Many, many years ago, I created a video that delved into the motivations of Kreia. Now, when it comes to the character of Kreia, there is a lot to unpack, and I tried to answer what she was trying to achieve in Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now, that video is old, outdated, so I thought I would give this topic a modern touch, one that's more aligned stylistically, visually, and narratively to my content of today. So after playing Knights of the Old Republic 2 for more times than I can truly count, Kreia never fails to fascinate me. I can listen to the character talk for hours, and even if you don't fully understand what she is trying to teach you in the game, there is something so alluring about her. And everything she says when it comes to the grander universe of Star Wars just makes you stop and think. And regardless of whether or not you disagree with her or agree with her at the end of the story, the way she talks to you, the calmness of her voice, the inflection of her words, captivates in such a unique way. There are so few characters ever that truly draw me in and make me use my brain cells in the way that Kreia does. But that is the thing with Kreia. You really need to think about every single word she says, because there is rarely a moment where she speaks to you in the game and what she is saying isn't conveying something important to her or the grander story. Everything has a meaning, and if you really want to understand the complexities of the character and understand her motivations overall within the plot, you really do need to listen intently and think about what she is saying. So it's understandable that many people might not truly understand what she was trying to achieve. It's very, very easy to misconstrue her cryptic nature with nonsense, and I can understand why there are people out there that view her as just an annoying old bat that talks to you and lectures you too much in the game. But she is far from that, because she truly does have a goal within the story. Everything she does is done with motivations. And it's ultimately down to us, the players, to piece together the individual meaning of everything she says, to almost put it together and paint a picture of a puzzle that ultimately unravels what she is trying to achieve. And yes, of course, everybody is going to potentially paint a different picture depending on your perspective of the character. But that doesn't change the objective motives of the character in the game. And when I say motives, that isn't me misspeaking, because she does have motives. Not just one, but several. And at times, these motives actually change depending on the actuality of events occurring in the games. Which is so true to her character as well. There is an amazing quote that she gives you in the game, and it's something that I find extremely profound and something that I take to heart. It's, "To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something that no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned."
To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned.
Now, Kreia practices what she preaches, because she puts this not only into practice as a person over the course of her life, but she puts this into practice in the game within her motivations, because her motivations do change. Now yes, she moves the puzzle pieces so that all of her motivations could ultimately come true, depending on the scenarios, but she changed her ideals for you, because you spark a change within her. Now let's really get into this. Kreia's grand master plan within Knights of the Old Republic 2 is to utilize echoes. Force echoes to be precise. Now it's very easy to just hear the word echoes, echoes, echoes constantly echoed throughout the game. And maybe it can just go over your head. It took me many playthroughs of Knights of the Old Republic 2 to come to these conclusions and to come to the understanding of what she was trying to do. I certainly didn't get it when I first played the game, so I wouldn't expect most people to either. But echoes are so important, because in the world of Star Wars, Echoes is just kind of a fancy way of describing one of the core elements of the story and one of the core themes of the game, and they are consequences. How actions, even small, can affect an entire galaxy on a grand scale, but also affect the hearts of people, affect humanity, which is also another core element of the game. Being fallible, being human, finding strength within ourselves from our struggles in life. Now, the easiest way to understand the idea of a Force echo is to imagine the Force itself as an ocean. The ocean is the epitome of nature. It is essential to life, and it moves of its own accord, weaving back and forward, affecting everything around it. Then, we have to imagine every event, every action, has an impact on the ocean in a small way, or a big way depending on its severity. Small actions that do not disturb the ocean on a grand scale are like small pebbles. They get thrown into the ocean and a tiny little ripple occurs, one that isn't felt by anybody. But then, we have to imagine death and destruction being like a gigantic rock. When that is thrown into the ocean, it creates a massive ripple that keeps spreading outwards depending on how large the rock is, the severity of the destruction.
There are places in the galaxy, strong in the Force, light, dark. They are born in places teeming with life, and in places that are filled with death. Worlds whose surfaces are graveyards, whose screams echo through the Force. It is possible for war, for men to give birth to such places, to leave wounds on the galaxy itself. What you heard was the echo of the past, and it travels still.
Now, these ripples in the ocean, in the Force, are not part of its natural movements. And so when they occur, they can be felt by everybody that's within the Force. And the bigger they are, the more unnatural, the more disturbing the ripples. This has a massive effect on everything that can feel it, to the point where it can overwhelm those that can feel it, causing pain, sometimes damage, and at the very worst, even death.
As much as you can form connections to others, such connections exist on a galactic scale as well. It is possible to hurt or sever those connections, to create places in the Force where it is difficult to center oneself, but that is the crudest form of manipulation. It is possible to affect those connections in other ways, by the slightest action, a seemingly minor choice, a small cruelty. The stronger your connection to life, to the Force, the stronger these echoes can be made, and the stronger they are felt. But this connection has other consequences. When the source is wounded, the one on which others draw strength, then they are wounded as well. What one feels, the other feels, and when others die, the scream travels back to the source. If they occur at the same time, or at the right time, these screams will build upon each other until it is the only sound you can hear, and the deaths of many will cause the screams to build until their pain becomes yours, and you die as well.
Now, Kreia herself, by the point of the story of Knights of the Old Republic 2, hates the Force. She has been a Jedi, she has been a Sith, and she has seen everything that the Force has to offer. And so she comes to the conclusion that the Force is nothing but an insidious god. She believes that the Force is just playing a game of balance with itself, and it uses every unaware living being within the galaxy as a means to achieve this.
It is said that the Force has a will. It has a destiny for us all. I wield it, but it uses us all, and that is abhorrent to me, because I hate the Force. I hate that it seems to have a will, that it would control us to achieve some measure of balance when countless lives are lost. But in you, I see the potential to see the Force die, to turn away from its will, and that is what pleases me. You are beautiful to me, Exile. A dead spot in the Force, an emptiness in which its will might be denied.
And over the course of her life, she came to learn about Force echoes, and how the greater the echo was, the more severe pain it would cause to someone who felt it. And she wanted to use Force echoes to essentially deafen the galaxy to the Force. She wanted to strip away the Force's control over those who worship it and give back power to people themselves and the choices that they make. And now we come to wounds in the Force, one of the central and most key parts of Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now, a wound in the Force is like the epicenter of mass destruction. It is something that has suffered so greatly within the Force that it left a wound. And this pain and this suffering ripples outwards constantly. A complete imbalance with the Force that never stops, and this suffering affects everything around it.
Someone is creating an echo, a resonance in the Force. Someone is consuming life, using it to feed their hunger. Each dying world creates an echo in the Force, and as the echoes build, it becomes a noise, deafening, destructive. It touches all life in ways that are invisible to see. The darkness, the despair created from such events breeds and grows. Someone is bringing the dark side to the galaxy through destruction. A critical point is approaching, and the wound must be healed.
You, the Jedi Exile, Mitra Surik, are a wound in the Force. An epicenter of devastation, but in this case, emotional devastation. The Jedi Exile had a very unique ability to create absurdly intense bonds through the Force. These were known as Force bonds. And during the Mandalorian Wars, over the course of the bloodshed and the pain and the chaos, she formed so many bonds with so many people on such a deep level. And so when she ordered all of their deaths in the mass devastation of Malachor 5, not only was a Force wound created on the planet where the devastation occurred, she felt this on such an unimaginable scale. The pain was unlike anything a Force user could ever imagine. And so she herself became a wound in the Force. But she did something no Force user had ever done, at least to Kreia's knowledge and our knowledge. She, in that very moment of destruction, deafened herself to the Force, unconsciously. She decided to turn away from the Force so completely and so utterly. She essentially decided to step out of the ocean so she couldn't feel any of the ripples anymore. And we have to remember that the Force flows through all living things. It is a natural part of life. And when you are connected to the Force on such a scale as the Jedi and Force users are, to disconnect yourself from the Force is to almost disconnect yourself from living. And this is why almost everybody would die if they attempted to do this. But the Jedi Exile didn't. But that disconnection created a severe wound in the Force. Now, there was 3 possible outcomes for the Jedi Exile in this moment. The first is that you die when being overwhelmed by these ripples, these echoes. This was the most common outcome that happened. But there was 2 other options, and they were to become a living embodiment of a wound in the Force. One wound would turn away from it and ultimately be able to live their lives freely. Yes, they may be a hole in the Force inherently, but they themselves are detached. They cannot feel this wound, they cannot feel that pain that they are carrying anymore. And the other is to be consumed by the wound, to become so unbelievably overwhelmed with that suffering that the only way to stop it from causing you so much pain is to consume the Force essence of another, and knowingly numb yourself to that suffering that you are emanating. Now, Darth Nihilus was the opposite to the Jedi Exile. Presumably, he also had the ability to form these bonds, and at the end of the Battle of Malachor 5, instead of turning away from the Force in that moment of pure suffering, he became consumed by the wound within himself. But that wound could never be satiated, and the only way that he could stop feeling pain, that pain emanating from inside, was to consume the Force of another, and this would numb his emotions and his feelings, but it also turned him into a being of pure intent. Now, when she became a Sith, Kreia intended to use the wounds in the Force. So she found Darth Nihilus, and she wanted to basically use him to destroy the Jedi, to destroy the light. But after she was betrayed, she realised that Darth Nihilus truly was nothing but a slave to the Force, regardless of the magnitude of his power. And then she remembered the Jedi Exile, and she became so utterly fascinated, so truly bewildered. She could not fathom a being so deeply entrenched within the Force that could just let go and continue to live her life unabated. But as she continued to learn and continued to pique her interest in the Jedi Exile, she learned that the combination of the wound at the heart of Malachor 5 and the wound within the heart of the Jedi Exile would create another wound. A wound that was similar to the one that the Jedi Exile felt when she killed all of those people above Malachor. But this time it would be on such an unprecedented scale where every living being connected to the Force within the galaxy felt the same pain. And this echo would give everybody a choice to disconnect oneself from the Force or die staying embraced within it, despite all of that pain.
Yes, you are an echo in the Force, a hollow space where it has been wounded. It takes a great act of destruction to create such emptiness, but it can be done. It creates places where the Force is difficult to hear and difficult to find one's way, and you carry it with you, always. Now she seeks to create another echo, a wound in the Force, greater than the one before, greater than the one you caused. It will deafen all touched by the Force until no life is left. You were strong enough to withstand it once, but few have your strength in such matters, especially if they are unprepared.
Kreia's goal here was to create a galaxy untouched by the insidious, constant warring of the Force and its obsession with balance. She wanted to give back control to the people, which is a strangely noble cause. But in the end, she was willing to do the unthinkable. She was willing to commit genocide to potentially achieve this, to kill billions, if not trillions of people in the pursuit of a noble end. And this is why Kreia is not a villain in the traditional sense. She is an anti-villain. Her goal is by definition noble, heroic even. She didn't want the individual beings of the galaxy to suffer and be enslaved by the Force's insidious will. If the Force was still in control of everything, there was always going to be a monster like Darth Nihilus. There was always going to be wars between the Jedi and the Sith, between the light and the dark, resulting in the endless suffering of innocent people. So she found the Jedi Exile and began to do what she did best. She began to move the pieces of the chessboard. She began to manipulate galactic events. Not only could she use the Jedi Exile's nature as a wound in the Force to stop Darth Nihilus, she could use the Jedi Exile to achieve her noble goal of deafening the galaxy to the Force. But as she began to travel with the Jedi Exile and to learn more about the nuances and the complexities of her story and her choices, she began to train her. She thought to herself, this was an interesting opportunity. Perhaps one last attempt at doing something right, and at the same time basically give a middle finger to all of these organisations that shunned her as a failure of a teacher, and to have the last laugh that she was the one that was right in the end.
What did you see in the web of worlds that have died? What did you see when you saw it through the Force?
I see the death of the galaxy, of life. At first, I thought it was just conquest. But it's more terrible than that. It's an echo, spreading outwards, killing everything. It's not possible.
Now you understand the magnitude of what is being done.
I know you. Not even the markings of the dark side can hide it. Why have you done this?
I? Do you think I seek the death of all living things? There is no victory in such things. I do not want to win our war like this, little Jedi. When I win, I wish it to be because I was right, my teachings true.
How long have you been here, among us?
You know the truth. I have always been here, watching and listening to the echo you have found. You know its source and what must be done.
I will not let you hurt her.
Little Jedi, you cannot stop me.
So Kreia did what all Jedi and all Sith failed to do. She adapted her plan. She betrayed her ideals to potentially achieve something different to what she originally intended. And after she discovered the Jedi Masters on Telos, this is where she decided that things were going to change. By allowing the Jedi Exile to physically feel the Force again, she then took her on an emotional journey of self-discovery. She taught her to confront the shadows of her past. But there was also something else that she did. She created a very unique bond, a Force bond with the Jedi Exile that would be so important. This bond was so intense that they could literally feel each other's pain, and they would also die if one or the other died. And the only way for this bond to evaporate essentially was the acceptance of death, of letting go. And this is actually a topic I want to cover in a future video, because I don't think it gets talked about enough. Now, every single moment of Knights of the Old Republic 2 that is significant is a significant confrontation of trauma, of consequences of the past. Whether this was Atris herself, the devastation of Duxon, the Mandalorians, the remnants of the Sith, the Jedi Masters, and then the most important things, the monster that she could have become in Darth Nihilus, and ultimately the source of it all, Malachor 5. To Kreia, if the Jedi Exile could confront and overcome all of this suffering and all of this trauma while being embraced by the Force again, something that has such a huge effect on emotion and has such a huge control over it, then this would prove her teachings to be true, proving effectively that it was the Jedi and the Sith that were wrong, that it was their failure and not hers.
I must know if killing them, if revenge brought you any measure of satisfaction, if seeing them dead has settled the disquiet within you. Did I wish to see them dead? No. Defeated, perhaps. I merely wished them to see that they and their teachings were wrong, that one could not truly understand the Force simply by adhering to the Jedi Code. All I have ever trained have been failures to them. Students who went to fight the Mandalorians, who fell to the dark side, who abandoned their training. To see one that had the strength to best them, that is a moment I will not forget. Yet it has not been as satisfying as I had hoped. To best one in battle is one thing. To defeat them without striking a blow, that was my hope.
And as the game progresses and the story and journey unfold, this becomes her goal. She wants to mold you, to use you as proof that the Force doesn't control everything, that free will and the Force can live in harmony through her teachings of how to do so. The very ideal, the very belief that she used to have, but was torn away from her after being cast down and shunned by everyone. This was her last chance to prove she was right. And through this journey, she also wanted to learn about the Jedi Exile inherently. She wanted to learn how somebody could turn away from the Force in such a way. What could give them the strength to make such a decision? And if you really think about it, her goal is to basically give a big FU to the Jedi Order. It's really petty. But through the Jedi Exile, she could create the foundation of a new Jedi Order. An order that wasn't dependent on the Force, but simply used it as a tool to achieve better things for the galaxy through free individual choice. However, Kreia was a very strict teacher, and she was astute. She would assure that only the strongest would surpass this challenge. And so everything that we do in the game is essentially a test by her, to prove to her that you are the one to lead things forward. But Kreia also knows that she is a relic of a bygone era. She is a relic of the Force's control over the freedoms of individual things, and there was no place in any event beyond this story. And she knew at the end of this journey that it would result in her death. But even in death, it would be one final lesson to the Jedi Exile. And the great thing was, all of her plans were a win-win. she had maneuvered all of these pieces of the chessboard that no matter the outcome, she got the last laugh. For example, if throughout the journey the Jedi Exile did become yet another failure, become another Darth Nihilus, drawing her to Malachor 5, the heart of the planet, and killing her would deafen the galaxy to the Force, her original plan. But I'm sure some of you are wondering, what if the Jedi Exile killed her? Well, because she had literally constructed the unique bond between the two where they could feel each other's pain even in death, if Mitra killed her, without her willingness to let go of the bond, the Exile would also die, again creating the echoes that would deafen the Force. But if the Jedi Exile surpassed her teachings, she would become, as I said, the foundation of a new order that was driven by the ideals of people, rather than by the will of the Force. An order that was willing to recognize the flaws of the Jedi of the past and the very code that they adhered to. So, as you can see, Kreia could not lose. She used you to fix all of her mistakes. Darth Nihilus would be dealt with, the Sith Triumvirate would be dealt with, the Republic and the Sith in general would be dealt with, Atris would be dealt with, and the outcome was foolproof depending on which way the Jedi Exile chose to go.
From the moment you awoke, I have used you. I have used you so that you might become strong, stronger than I. I used your death to deceive the Sith, to make them believe they had won, so they would turn on each other. I used you to keep the Lords of the Sith from condemning the galaxy to death with their power unchecked. I used you to lure them to Telos, where they could be at last fought and killed. I used you to reveal Atris's corruption so that her teaching could be ended before it began. I used you to gather the Jedi so they could be destroyed, and I used you to make those who wounded me reveal themselves so they could be killed by the Republic.
This is why Kreia is brilliant. She covered all bases. There was no failure regardless of which way you went. She won no matter what. And like I said, I do want to create a future video going into depth on the Force bond between the two. Because with the ending of Knights of the Old Republic 2, many people think that you kill Kreia. But I don't believe this is the case. I actually think Kreia chooses to let go of the Force, much like the Jedi Exile does. She chooses to die at peace, and this is why Mitra doesn't die through the Force bond. But I will delve into that in another video, so if you want to see that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you're notified when I release it. Now, after going in depth in such a way with the character, this is why for me personally the continuation of Mitra's story in the Revan novel and the Old Republic MMO was a complete disservice to the masterclass of writing that was Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now yes, Revan is a fundamental character to this story entirely, perhaps even more so, but they completely forgot about the importance of what Kreia had established. Through the teachings of the Jedi Order. The Jedi Order that she left behind when she went to search for Revan was an extension of Kreia's teachings. But just like that, the Jedi Exile up and becomes another stereotypical Jedi dog. And it's just like the entire story of Knights of the Old Republic 2 and the events that they were left with at the end of the game just became irrelevant. However, of course I have to be aware that the Jedi Order do end up becoming dogmatic in their views again thousands of years down the line with George Lucas's stories. But there was absolutely no nuance in the stories post Knights of the Old Republic 2 that showcased their steady decline to their original ways. The book and the game essentially retcon everything at the end of Knights of the Old Republic 2, and this is why I hate both of them for what they do to that specific story. Because it was the complexities of where Knights of the Old Republic 2 left the Star Wars galaxy. It posed so many fantastic questions of the world that George Lucas had built, and most of those questions came from Kreia. And those questions were answered in a way that broadens the nuance and the intricacies of the Star Wars mythos that almost every future writer was afraid of. And so most of them were just like, you know what, this is a little bit too complex for us, so let's just go back to writing what we know. Good Jedi, bad Sith. And what a tragedy it was to see such an incredible story like Knights of the Old Republic 2 reduced to nothing within the grander Star Wars universe. So there we have it, there are Kreia's goals and motivations all summed up nicely, and hopefully this video has answered most of the questions you may have had that confused you after playing Knights of the Old Republic 2. But if there is still a question or something that confuses you about Kreia that I haven't answered in this video, then do leave a comment in the comment section below. I'm happy to answer what I can, if I didn't manage to cover it in this video. Anyway, as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and perhaps share it if you thought it was a good video. It honestly helps me out so much. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But remember, if you liked this video and you don't like and subscribe, apathy is death.